My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Special guest today, man, the great Robert Kirkman. You know the name, man. Rattle off some titles, Jimmy.
Invincible and Walking Dead are sort of the alpha and omega in a lot of ways. That's whenever Kirkman burst onto our scene.
2003.
But certainly not the end of it. Outcast, Super Dinosaur, Haunt with Todd McFarlane. It's a big long list, and partner at Image Comics.
Yeah, we got to get into all of that, man. But first, Robert, the people want to know, man. What did you spend your $1,200 COVID-19 fucking stimulus check on, dude?
Probably Transformer toys, if I have to be honest. I don't know. Thanks for having me. This is very exciting. I'm going to start this with, I got to complain to you guys a little bit. I watched the show. You guys do too much. I don't have time for all this shit. I got to watch a 2-hour video about a Kevin Eastman interview in Comics Journal. I got to watch a 2-hour, you got these Chris Claremont, Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson, Howard Chaykin, It's like you guys doing 4 or 5 hours of content a week, or did I come late? It seems like so much.
We have a whole team of interns doing all this research and prep for us.
We did a big interview yesterday, in fact, with David Cho, and he brought up the Kevin Eastman Tundra interview as when he got his windfall and shit. That was his only textbook to sort of know how to operate once that happens, man.
I read that interview back in the day, and I think that a lot of what I use your YouTube channel for is, I got to go buy that on eBay. Because I do a lot of that. I actually went and found that issue of Comics Journal. I love eBay. Just the fact that you can find old issues of Comics Journal for $6 and have somebody mail it to your house is just the best thing in the world. It's what makes the future the greatest. But yeah, I don't know. I think my experience is more in my early comic days when I was completely flat broke. I had a lot of contact with Eric Larson and Rob Liefeld, and got to talk to them about managing finances and trying not to lose your head if things actually take off. And so that was very helpful to me. I think I had long forgotten that Kevin Eastman interview because I read it when I was a teenager. So yeah.
That should be instructive once you start up Skybound. You have to limit yourself and not pick up 70 new books at Comic-Con every year.
We keep it pretty manageable. Every now and then there's I don't care if I make any money off of this. We're just going to do it book. But yeah, I don't worry, guys. I'm not planning on going broke anytime soon.
Yeah, of course. That's one of the things that I fucking love about comics. It really is one of the last kind of media that publishers will take a chance. It used to be in the music biz. The famous story, Bruce Springsteen. It took 3 albums before the E Street Band hit. And sort of he made, his big record, and they would invest in you a little bit of time. Can't do that with movies, can't do that in television, can't do that almost anywhere. But comics, the barrier to entry, the cost to publish a book is fairly nominal compared to a lot of other media out there, man. So just another beauty.
That's why our industry drives all of entertainment at this point, because we're the test case, we're the canary in the coal mine. We can go out there, and risk the danger of having a project fail without it crippling you. So that's why we're at the cutting edge.
That's how I describe it. Doing Marvel projects or whatever. When I got a peek inside, behind the door, I describe it as probably the cheapest research and development staff. A Universal Studios would kill to have people who aren't in a union, generating tons of ideas for them to just pick and choose what they want to turn into other things.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
For nominal page rates. It's crazy.
Because we love it.
Right.
Love of the game. Robert, you mentioned buying Comics Journal back issues off of eBay. Are you a big comics collector? Is that something that has always been a part of your life?
Yeah. I started buying comic books when I was, 12, 13, something like that. I still have every comic book I've ever bought. For the most part, I had a catastrophic basement flood a few years ago and lost 10, 15 long boxes. But I don't know exactly what was in those long boxes, and it hasn't really seemingly put a dent in my collection. So there's a lot of ignorance is bliss to that loss, where I'm like, I think I still have that, and I probably don't. But yeah, I mean, I still buy a few things. Right now I collect Amazing Spider-Man 344. That was the first comic book I ever bought. It's a Eric Larson drawn, David McElhaney written issue. It's got the Rhino fighting Spider-Man on the cover, and Cardiac is there, and there's like all kinds of different captions and lettering like all over the cover. And I because it was one of the first issues of Spider-Man I ever bought, or no, it was the first comic I ever bought. I buy that comic anytime I see it. So I have like I have a short box and then some extra comics. I'm getting to a point where I'll have a long box of that one issue. It's pretty stupid. I don't know why I started doing it. I just thought it would be kind of fun to have a ton of that one comic.
Do you still have your issue, the one that you got?
I do still have my issue, and I got Eric to sign it.
Yeah, see that one issue has extra power to it.
That is a weird comic to be a first comic. What made you decide at that age to buy that comic?
Oh, it was just the issue of Spider-Man that just happened to be on the rack in Walmart when I was like, hey, these look cool. I started buying comics because I collected baseball cards, and my dad would take me around to baseball card shops, and I could get like the Jose Canseco cards and stuff like that. I wasn't a big baseball fan, but I enjoyed collecting the cards. And we went to one that was like half baseball card shop and half comic shop one time. And my dad bought an entire run of Iron Man, which was the John Byrne written John Romita Jr. Armors War II run.
Yeah, it's a good run.
There's like the Mandarin and Fin Fang Foom and all this great stuff. Fantastic art. And he bought that stuff because when he was a kid, he loved the Metal Men, and he thought that Iron Man was one of the Metal Men, which cracks me up. And my dad was a welder by trade, so it's even more ridiculous that his favorite comic as a kid was Metal Men. But those issues were sitting around the house, and he got them and read them, and then just kind of like discarded them. And so I found them and just read them one day. And so that was the first time I had ever like read like a full run of comics. I mean, there had been like an issue of Captain America and things like that I had gotten my hands on. But reading that run was like, oh, geez, these are the coolest things ever. And then the next thing I knew, I was at a Walmart and saw all these Marvel comics, and I grabbed a few, and one of them was Amazing Spider-Man 344, and that's what got me in. So I've been collecting that single issue, which is cool only because once you have a bunch of the same issue, it's like, okay, this one was sun faded, this one was early on the printing press, like this one was late, like these pages are kind of faded, the cover is a completely different color. The variance in printed comics back then is staggering. There's trim differences where like there'll be like half an inch cut off on one cover, and then like different things are around the edges or in different distances from the edge, which is pretty cool. And so I like paying attention to that stuff. This is so lame.
I love this a lot.
Stupid.
Well, welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe, my man. You're amongst friends here, man, because I think maybe it was episode 1 where we're showing off, we have every comic in the Wizard top 10 in issue 1 and several copies of each, and we're comparing the banding of the ink color coverage on X-Force 100. So you're amongst friends here, Robert. Never you mind.
Great. But the other thing I'm collecting right now is I'm trying to amass a run of like Claremont's run of X-Men. Nice. That's one of the reasons I was like, I got to watch this Claremont interview. So I've been picking that kind of stuff up.
See, a big influence for doing your own serial stuff, Claremont X-Men?
I mean, I would say more like when I started reading comics, Claremont's run was had already been kind of co-opted by Jim Lee, and Jim Lee was slowly pushing him out the door.
Right.
So it was a little, it wasn't. More for me was Peter David's Hulk run at the time. I think because of Dale Keown's art, that was something that I really got into. And I love the Pantheon. I love the Smart Hulk, like that whole storyline. I thought that was super great. And then I didn't know that Todd McFarlane had drawn Hulk before he did Spider-Man. And so then when I found that out, I started going and getting Hulk back issues and things like that. And so, seeing his, definitive Hulk run, which, at the time seemed like, oh God, this guy's been writing the Incredible Hulk for 100 years. I want to do that someday. Like I want to write a book for a long time. I did Walking Dead for like 16 years. I don't think he wrote Hulk for 16 full years. I think it was probably like 8 or 9 or something when it gets down to it, uh, uh, which just makes me feel old. But that and David McElhinney's Spider-Man run, I think those were the two like true norths for me before the Image era when those guys started their own books.
Did you know at that point was writing kind of in the plans for you?
Not really. I wanted to draw. I wanted to be a comic book artist. In the 90s, you barely even noticed the writers' names. I mean, they were still credited first. That's one of the reasons why I'm like, I don't really think you need to like the name credits are in the order that the job is done. I don't think that, writer being first doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be, that it's more prominent. Because back in the 90s, it's like, oh yeah, that's a Rob Liefeld comic, that's a Jim Lee comic, that's a Eric Larson comic, Todd McFarlane comic. Like I didn't know who any of these people were. I wasn't the biggest Brandon Choi fan, but it's sure he's a great guy. I don't know. I thought that would be funny. It came out and it just sounded mean.
Hey man, he's one of the luckiest guys in comics. We'll call him.
Did Todd McFarlane hold his hand over Brandon Choi in that picture he held up in our interview?
No, that was Hank Canals.
Oh, okay,
Hank Canals, yeah, the young blood scripter, but yeah, I wanted to be an artist because comics is an artist-driven medium, and that was the stuff that appealed to me. And then I slowly, as I tried to get into comics, found out that I'm not a very good artist, and I wanted to be Eric Larson, basically. I wanted to be a writer-artist that was doing my own stories and, had my own series that I controlled, got to do whatever I wanted with. But quickly realized that I was going to have to get other people to draw it or it was never going to get published because I was a pretty lazy artist. I was very good. I wasn't very good, but I could draw a person from like one angle.
That's the children of Image, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. Once you start moving it around, it's like, oh, I don't know how to draw a head from that angle.
I'm a big Eric Larson fan as well. And one thing we do from time to time when names come up, I love to hear other creators talk about different artists or writers. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in Eric Larson's work, what you appreciate, what you think, makes him Eric Larson?
Yeah, it was looking at it now with what I know about comics, it's all the power and energy and movement from Kirby comics, but with a 90s flavor on it that makes it infinitely more appealing at the time. Just like when characters in Eric Larson comics fought, like there was just an energy to that and a brutality to the impacts with like people, like pushing their faces in walls and like buildings collapsing around people. Like it was just, it's absolutely crazy. And, it's a little bit of Walt Simonson. It's a little bit of Kirby, Larson's influences. But for me, like that was just the be all end all. And the fact that he was so consistent with Savage Dragon at a time when all the other Image founders were not, like that was a book that you could really kind of hang your hat on and like get to know the character. And for the most part, know that you were going to get an issue month in and month out. And the way he built that story and made you, invested in those characters and, his goal of like, in interviews, he would always talk about like, you don't know what Spider-Man's favorite music is. I'm going to say he's a big, Eric Clapton fan. And, I'll put Peter Frampton albums in his house and stuff like that. Him bringing that personality into stories, which, a lot of people were doing. But with Savage Dragon, it was such a commercial appealing like superhero comic that was tailor made for me because I was like 14 at the time, but it had that extra level of like indie comic and the drama of like, like, I don't know, like a Minimum Wage or a Grendel or something like that, where it's like, there's a lot of interpersonal stuff. There's a lot of dark stuff. It's very cool.
I like that you noted the regularity of that comic. It's something that I take for granted because I start reading comics before Image. When it was just monthly, every 4 weeks I would get the new issue at the newsstand. But if you come in post Image, it's one of the few books that really had that quality. And when I think of your work, Robert, I think of things like the run of Walking Dead and Invincible being so consistent month in, month out. So interesting that you note that quality, I think.
I think that's literally everything. I think that creators these days have a hard time building a fan base because they're not regular, because they're not, building this block of work that that people could call to, that people, that comes up in people's minds when they think about you. I think it's a real problem with modern creators. And I think it's, not their fault entirely. I think that Marvel and DC actively try to keep people from like doing long runs on books because they like to be able to, plug artists on events to boost sales. And, I've heard stories of them going to artists and they're like, I kind of like being on this book. I want to stay on this book. And they're like, okay, cool. Well, that book's canceled. You're now doing this now. And that's unfortunate because I think that, the fan base, really likes being able to stay on one run and get some kind of consistent vision on that run. Yeah, I mean, it's important to me as a reader. My entire career is based on things that, excite me as a comic book reader. So, consistent monthly comics is the thing that I like the most. So that's the kind of stuff that I try to focus on.
Our very first shoot interview of this kind in a digital way, that was with Todd McFarlane. He was extolling the virtues of, page a day, 5 days a week kind of thing. And he's coming from the space of like, artist, writer, probably predominantly artist with what we were talking about in the conversation. That really inspired me. And from that moment forward, I've been really like trying to like create a situation here where I'm doing these right now, like singular, like one issue stories that 22 pages, and just building them up to then do something with them. What can you give some advice to somebody when it comes to writing the monthly comic, keeping notes in between, scheduling, stuff like that, especially with all the shit you have on your plate?
I was much better at it in my 20s, I'll say that. Now that I'm in my 40s, I do find myself sitting down to write, an issue of Oblivion Song and going, okay, well, I've been writing Firepower and Outcast and Die, 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 and I don't even remember what the hell this book's about. Like, and so I have like all these notes that I have to keep where it's like, okay, this character does, okay, yeah. And what happened in the last issue? There's like a day of research I have to do before every issue now, which I didn't really have to do in my 20s, which is extremely frustrating. Because back then I'd be like, oh yeah, this is what's happening in Invincible, boom, go. But I don't know. I mean, I think it all boils down to find something that you're really passionate about. Like find something that you really love, because if you want to do something consistently month in and month out, it's going to need to be something that like, really appeals to you. So like find that genre, find that story that you just want to live in for a very long time. Invincible was everything I had ever loved about superhero comics put into one book. So I could do literally anything in that comic. If I was feeling like a space vibe, if I want, one thing that I really regret is I never had an adventure where the superheroes went into hell. Like, there's been so many superhero comics where it's like they got to go fight Mephisto or something. And I was like, geez, I just never got around to that. And the Damien Darkblood character that was in Invincible was there so that I could eventually do a story like that. And I never got around to it. So like Invincible was there for like, oh, if I want to do an Atlantis adventure or any kind of superhero thing, I could put my own spin on it and do it within that series. And so like, I think the point I'm trying to make is that was a book that could have been 17 different books, but because I was able to do it all in one series, that's how you get to 144 issues. So yeah.
We just took a look at Walking Dead #1 and just study it more academically. It's been a while since since I read the thing. You set up infinite possibilities in that world with that first issue. It's like we know what the intention and obstacle is. We know that this guy wants to get reacquainted with his family. We certainly know what the obstacle is. Freaking Walking Dead, and that's all you need, man. Now somebody could have teased that out. That could have been like Quantum Leap, and somebody could have teased that out for the entire series. You told that story sort of quick enough, and then we were like, you could just, if you get bored with that part, well, what's happening in France right now? Because it's like it's clearly the world, and that's what's been fascinating me about comics lately is like the world building aspect.
What's like good television, a good network television especially, isn't necessarily a plot. It's like you're building a story engine. So with Walking Dead, it's like you're in a world where zombies are everywhere, and so there's a built-in conflict that can pop up at any time to make any story interesting. So it's like I'm looking for my estranged mother and I want to reunite with her. Like that's a story that you can tell, and that's an interesting story. But if you have zombies in that world, it makes it a little bit more compelling, a little bit more interesting. you've got a good story engine there where you've always got a zombie button you can hit, or break glass in case of emergency. And you can tell, like any kind of dramatic personal story, or any kind of adventure story or anything you want, like within that universe. And a good network television show does that, where it's like, we've got a guy who's a scientist and he's got to solve a problem, and there's 1,000 of these problems. And so it's like every week it's just like, oh, okay, there's another one of these problems he's got to solve. Like, okay, cool. That's the key to longevity.
That's a good term, man. Story engine. I've never heard that.
Yeah, the other note I would pull from issue 1 of Walking Dead is that it feels satisfying as a unit. Is that something you think about, or have any rules in your head, guidelines, ideas of what makes an issue or a satisfying issue?
Yeah, well, writing for the trade is very much vilified these days. And I agree with that. I think that if you are writing single issues that only work as chapters of a longer story, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice, and you should just be doing graphic novels. So every single issue has to have some kind of event. It doesn't necessarily need to be a story with a beginning, middle, and end. I think that would be ideal if you can pull that off, but that is somewhat difficult. But you need to have some kind of like anchor moment, or some kind of really important scene, or something that makes the issue a piece, that exists on its own. And, like I understand why this exists in this nugget. Like, the issue starts here, the issue ends here. There's got to be something really interesting that happens here to, get you to those 2 points. And if you do that with every issue, your overall story when you get to the trade is going to be more compelling, because you've forced yourself to put something interesting in every single chapter. So you have 6 big moments in every single trade paperback when it comes out. So by forcing yourself to make the individual issues interesting, you're actually making your arc better. Mignola did a Hellboy story that only appeared, I believe it was in the Capitol Comics catalog. Am I getting that right? Is that
It's
the old Diamond competitor that
right.
Diamond, I think, bought?
Yeah, Advanced Heroes, maybe.
Yeah, so in the catalog they were like, it would be 2 pages of Hellboy. So every month, I think for a year, you got 2 pages of Hellboy, and he talked about how that story is like, I can't remember if it's the corpse.
Yes,
I think it might be the corpse that it was. Yeah, and so like if you go back and you read the corpse, like every 2 pages, you're like, oh, this is cool. Oh, this is cool. Like, this is super cool. And he talked about how like doing it in that format forced him to make every 2-page chunk like super interesting. And so that story is fantastic and historic because of that. And I remember reading about that. And look, let's be honest, most of my career is just copying moves that Eric Larson made in Savage Dragon. Like, if you go back and read that run, like especially the first 7,500 issues, you'll be like, oh, that's that one trick he pulled in Invincible, and that's that one thing he did in Walking Dead. So I have to give Eric a ton of credit. And I learned a lot from Rob Liefeld too, like the way he would do big splash page cliffhangers, and that ending to New Mutants 100 is like just like an atomic bomb that I think has inspired almost everything I do, to the point where if you go through Walking Dead, it's like almost every issue ends with some kind of splash page revelation that I'm just trying to make as cool as the Strife revelation. But getting back to the Walking Dead thing, so but I would also know that I have a 6-issue trade, a 12-issue hardcover, a 24-issue slipcase hardcover, and a 48-page compendium. And it's a little bit of extra work, but I would always plot to those breaks, just because I'm just scaling out the Mignola, corpse theory. So, you make every issue interesting. You make every trade end on a bigger moment. So every 6th issue, there's like a big moment to end a trade. Every 12th issue, there's an even bigger moment to end the hardcover. Every 24th issue, there's a big cover or big image, big moment to end, the slipcase hardcover. And then every compendium, every 48th issue, there's got to be some big thing there. I didn't always come up with a good idea. but I always tried. So if you look at the end of issue 24, the issue 48, I'm not good at math, so I'm just going to stop there. But every 24 issues, there was something, pretty big that happened in Walking Dead. And I would always keep a log of like, okay, I'm coming to this issue soon, so I got to come up with something for that. And every now and then I would just, manufacture something, um, uh, uh, where I would just kind of like, I can't think of a good example. But I would just go, oh, I don't know, something interesting has to happen here. I guess this person dies now, or I'm moving this villain up. I was going to introduce this villain later, but this is happening here now, just to make sure that those collections end on that moment.
Once you start writing, working in television, do you learn a lot about writing from that process? And if so, can you talk about any of the things that maybe inform your process now, things that have changed or things you become, I don't know, maybe more aware of that you used to do intuitively, but going through that process, you're now more conscious of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not great at verbalizing it, but there would be, I can't remember specifics, but it's stuff that I guess to a certain extent does come to you naturally, but you're better at accessing it once you understand like how people view stories and how certain things, things like three act structure and like knowing commercial breaks and how they work and different things like that. I would be in the Walking Dead writers room and they would be like, oh yeah, this is like a such and such construct of this kind of thing. And I'd be like, oh, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Like, what do you mean? And they'd be like, come on, man. And then they would kind of run through this like theory of, storytelling or whatever. And I'd be like, oh shit. Oh, that's pretty cool. And being in the Walking Dead writers room was the most humbling. It was a lot of fun, but not only was it constant, like you're in a room 8 to 10 hours a day with 6, 7 other writers that are, I think most of them were older than me too, but all more skilled. All they've all done more stuff and definitely had more schooling than me. I barely graduated high school, so I'm constantly learning from them. But more than that, they're tearing my work apart every day. So they'd be like, oh yeah, I like this part from the comic, but this didn't really work, and maybe we should try it this way because the way it worked in the comic, it just. I'm sorry, Robert, you understand, and I'd be like, yeah, no, I get it. That's totally, yeah. I didn't. There was definitely a problem with that I had to deal with because I had to do this and this because of it, and yeah, like it would work better if we did it this way, and it was a lot of fun. I can imagine for some people it would be a very frustrating experience, but. I do feel like I learned a lot. I think the comic book got better. I mean, I think issue 70 or so was coming out when I went into the Walking Dead writers room. And I think that the stories got a lot stronger from there. I'm going to keep making this weird movement because I've got like one headphone in because otherwise I just hear like echo and I can't really hear my voice.
That's fair.
And it keeps clipping the edge of my desk. And so I'll be like, oh, I can't move. So then I have to move it. So that's going to keep happening. I wish I could fix it, but I can't.
No sweat.
But yeah, very humbling, gratifying experience being surrounded by writers better than me, talking about how weak some of the stories in the comic I started writing when I was 23 was.
When you start to get some of that intel from the Hollywood guys, can you fit something like a 3-act structure into a single issue, or does that factor into the more macro vision of the trade, or is it mostly an intuitive process?
Well, I will say that I never tried.
Right.
So I guess it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm more than willing to admit that I'm a moron. But after spending all the time and seeing why 3-act structure works and learning all about that, I never thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to incorporate this into comics and see how it works. Mainly because I feel strongly that the strength of comics is that you don't have to adhere to that stuff. I think that people who are sitting on a couch watching a television program or sitting in a movie theater watching a very succinct I like to think that like television and movies are like they're like half talent and half science, because you have to be constantly monitoring in a somewhat creative way like how the story is being interpreted and how the audience is feeling so that they feel a certain way at certain points during a story and are being fulfilled narratively. So it's like, like I have to feel this about this character at this point, or else I'm not going to be invested in the story. I'm not going to like the movie. I need to know that the villain is a bad guy because of this by this point. I need to, there needs to be a narrative turn at this point, because by this point, usually people are getting tired because they've been sitting in a chair for an hour and, 5 minutes. So you want to get people re-excited for the third act. That stuff is fascinating to me. The strength of comics, I think, is that you can do whatever the fuck you want. You don't have to adhere to any of that stuff. Like it's all dependent on the way the reader decides to read it. A comic book can be read in 5 minutes. A comic can be read in 30 minutes, depending on how meticulous you want to be in consuming the art, or just how fast you want to be reading the story. And I think that's great. And I love being able to subvert expectation in comics. I like being able to, do some kind of crazy narrative turn on like page 3. So it's like, no, I'm not saving the cool thing to the end. You're getting it right now, and we're going to deal with this now. And so being in the writer's room possibly made me more experimental, because I'd be like, okay, this is how it works in TV, and this is how you guys have to do that. These are the rules you guys have to follow. I'm now going to go home and work on this thing in this fantastic medium that you guys barely know about, where I get to do whatever the fuck I want, and then you assholes are going to be copying it in 3 years.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting. I think there are differences in terms of television being almost hypnotic, right? It's like we always misunderstand, especially traditionally, that the consumers of television are advertisers. Like, we're the product, the viewers are the product. So you need it to be almost this hypnotic, like very tightly timed thing. Sometimes I think of 3-act structure, especially for storytelling, it's just beginning, middle, end.
Yeah.
That really hard, like 25% is act 1, 50% act 2. That's more of that television movie kind of model. But I think the beginning, middle, end part is an instructive piece you can take away from that. And how you balance those out is maybe the freedom of comics. So I think Dan Clowes used to say, like, for structure, just watch old television episodes, because they're so tight, like they're so exactly at those moments. It's like 6 minutes, end of act 1, or whatever in a 22-minute show. So
I mean, you can Google charts and it'll tell you, like, here's where you need to be at this minute and things like that. Shit, now I forgot what I was going to say. That's going to happen from time to time.
That's all right. We tend to bounce around, and speaking of bouncing around, another thing that I'm curious about, Robert, is collaboration. You've had very strong ties with your artist on several of these books. What do you look for in an artist? Can you kind of give us some insight in that?
I mean, as a disgruntled artist myself, like, it just needs to excite me. I think I've worked with a wide range of styles. I don't have like a certain kind of artist that I like over another. I love the Kirby school, the Toth school. There's all these different sects of, I love 90s art. Very big fan of that stuff. It's, I mean, literally everything I do is just to excite myself. Like, I've gotten to a point where, like, when you're a comic book creator, you guys know this, you guys are doing this, like, all your passion projects are the shit you wish people were publishing.
Oh, definitely.
And it's like a bummer that you don't get to read it. Like, I feel like if I wasn't me and I could read the comics I do, I'd be like, man, these are fucking cool. But maybe I'd be like, what the fuck's this guy thinking? This guy sucks. But who knows? But like, it's I want to do the stories that I'm excited about. I want to work with the artist whose art I want to look at, and it's a real I want to say power trip. That seems kind of shitty, but like, being able to like fall in love with an artist and be like, I don't know, I kind of want to see that guy draw like a werewolf ripping a rocket ship in half, and then I'll be like, I'll just work that into a book. Cool. Now I get to see Chris Samnee draw a werewolf ripping a rocket ship in half. This is going to be fucking awesome. And every now and then every now and then in the script, at the end of the description, it'll say, I want to buy this original art. Don't sell this to anybody else. So it's like, I'm kind of calling it before the art comes in, which is always kind of fun. So yeah, it's really just, like, whoever's art excites me.
Here's a cartoonist kayfabe test, man, because you brought up the Kirby school, the Toth school, 1990s art. Where do you stand on Outlaw Comics, specifically Tim Vigil and or James O'Barr?
I'm not necessarily a prude, but
You
I'm
are
not looking for
you are
comics filled with severed penises. You know what I'm saying?
you are a Kentucky colonel, and there are certain responsibilities that come with that.
I am a genteel Southern gentleman, and I do not need severed penises in my comical books. But no, I mean, I think Tim Vigil is a fantastic artist. But the material in Faust was horrifying to me. I mean, I was aware of it. I looked at it. I worked at a comic shop in 1990. It's like 97 to 99, I think. So like I saw all that stuff. But yeah, it was not. I mean, I like I say, the art was fantastic. I wish he was drawing Ghost Rider. I don't know.
That's fair. The only reason I even brought it up was because I was thinking about the gore factor, some of the zombies and shit like that, and I could see that being a kissing cousin.
Yeah, I mean, I love gory movies, but I guess where I draw the line is the severed penises, guys.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's tough.
Yeah, can't argue against that.
You know, the one thing that you didn't mention in terms of artists, Robert, is like dependability. You know, like you've had runs with these artists that are 10 years without missing a more or less monthly schedule. Like, how do you? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how you can know if somebody's dependable. But I mean, is there something that you see in these people's work? Because some of them, like Ryan Otley, I don't know what he was doing before, you know, he comes to Invisible. I don't think he has a big monthly history that you can look at.
He was working in a warehouse before he started drawing Invincible. I have two things. One, I spend a lot of time on the internet looking at artists, and two, like my closest friend in the world, Corey Walker, spends a lot of time on the internet looking at artists, and so he will just email me and be like, "You should. This guy's name is Lorenzo De Felici. He's this Italian guy. You should fucking work with him, man. He's great." And I'll be like, "What?" Oh, what? And I'm like, "Oh, geez, this guy is amazing." And then like I cyber stalk him and like watch his DeviantArt page for a while, and then after a while I have a project where I'm like, "Oh yeah, this guy would be perfect." And then next thing you know, I'm doing an Oblivion song, and that's all because Corey Walker's like, "Pay attention to this guy." So I have a pretty good eye for art myself, I think. But I also have Corey, who has like the best taste possible in comic art. That's like, like trying to find me these gems and stuff. But as far as dependability, I will say two things. One, when it comes to people like Charlie Adlard has this insane reputation for being nothing but professional and on time, and he's had that for years.
Long
and he
track
was working
record.
in the 90s, and
Right.
so I knew when I needed to find somebody that could draw Walking Dead on time, he was the guy to go to. Aside from the fact that I absolutely loved his art, and I knew that he would bring the exact mood needed for that book.
Big run on X-Files, we should say, way back in the 90s, which is noteworthy because licensed comics often don't look good or don't go well. That's a pretty good run.
Yeah, but the second thing I will say is that undependable comic book artists is to a certain extent a myth. Comic book artists work at a certain speed that they work at. Some of them are slow, some of them are fast. But for the most part, aside from a few exceptions, those speeds are consistent. So what you have is not lazy, irresponsible artists. What you have is impatient, disingenuous, reckless publishers. So when you have a book that comes out and the second or third issue is late because it is drawn by a guy who is notorious for not hitting his deadlines, whose fault is that? It's not the fucking artist. The artist draws how the artist draws. He's been drawing comics for 10, 15, 30 years. The publisher knows that book's going to be late. The publisher doesn't give a shit. The publisher has like a quota to hit for their quarter. And so they're like, well, if I plug in a book by this guy, I can get 2 issues out, and those 2 issues will sell, a certain amount, and that'll make my nut for the quarter. And on the annual report, everything will look great. And, who cares if the fans get mad at this artist for shipping another late book? I mean, he's got that reputation. So like, I have some artists that I've worked with that are slow, and I will, work by. I mean, Lorenzo, turned out to be a lot faster than I thought he would be. But when I first started working with him, he's like, "Hey man, I'm Italian." He didn't say that, but like he works on like European albums and stuff, and had been producing, I think, like 50 pages a year before I started working with him. And so he was like, "I definitely can't color this book. I usually pencil ink and color my work. I think I can go pretty fast if I'm just penciling and inking my book. So let's try that and see what happens." And so I let him work on that book for a year and find his pace before we even announced it. That is a tremendous expense, because he has 50% ownership in Oblivion Song and profits off of it just like I do. But I also pay him a page rate because working a year for free, waiting for payments to come in, is not feasible for someone. So he gets his upfront payment, and that costs money to pay a guy to work on a book for a year when you're not putting it out. But I'm fortunate enough to have those resources, and those big companies also have those resources.
Yeah, it's got them right. Disney, little mouse.
They have money over there?
Yeah, I've heard of him. Robert, how much do you provide for your artists to draw? Is it a very, very rigid, tight script down to the panel count? Is it close to Marvel method? What's the process?
It is wildly inconsistent.
Based on the artist or your time?
No, I mean, I write full. I've done a few books in the past. I wrote Super Dinosaur, Haunt, The Infinite, and Image United plot style because I wanted to try that with Jason Howard on Super Dinosaur because he's writing books now. Like, he's very capable and knows what he's doing. Greg Capullo was like, "I ain't reading no script, bro. You need to learn how to write a plot." And so I was like, "Wait a minute, you want me to write like, I don't know, a paragraph or less for every page so that my script isn't like 18 to 20 pages long? It's like 7 pages long and I'm still going to get paid the same and you're going to turn it into something brilliant? Like, I think I can make that work." And so that was a lot of fun. But I prefer to write full script style. Just because the only way I know how to tell a story is by picturing the pages I'm picturing the pages I would draw in my head if I was an actual good artist, and then I'm just transcribing that. So a lot of my scripts are, if you just look at them, they're like rigid and almost offensive to a comic book artist, because I'll be like, wide panel, this guy's in the foreground, this guy's in the background, this is going on here, blah, 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 blah. Below that, it's a small panel with another small panel beside it. It's close up on this guy's face. The other one's close up on this guy's face. And we get a wide panel below that and a wide panel below that. So you can picture that page: wide panel, 2 panel, wide panel, wide panel. And I tell every artist before I start working with them, that's just the only way I can picture the page. I'm giving you a suggestion. I don't care about any of that shit. Like, if you want to change stuff, like please change it. But like, I'm giving you what I'm picturing in my head so that you know, like, basically what I'm looking for. And I give, I have all the dialogue pretty much final, so that they know, like, I got to leave room for this word balloon. I got to leave room for this word balloon. Don't have to draw a background here, because all he wants is a guy talking, and he's got 3 word balloons in this panel. So I ain't drawing shit back there. I try to give artists that leeway so that they know, like, where to work and where not to work. But I have some guys that follow me fairly closely. And then I have other guys that are just like, I've got this. Like, I don't think Chris Somney has followed my panel layout in the script like once the entire time we've been working on Firepower. And as I say this now, Firepower has not yet launched, but we have already done 18 issues of that book.
That's awesome.
Wow.
So yeah, I talk like I've been working with the guy for a while, but the book hasn't even come out yet.
Why 18 issues before you even launch? I mean, that seems a little bit excessive. Are you waiting for do you have something in mind in terms of a launch for that?
Well, the book would be out by now if it wasn't for the pandemic. But also, the first issue is a 6-issue. It's actually almost 7 issues worth of comics. It's like 54 story pages. And we launched with an OGN because I thought it would be cool to, we'll find out if it's cool. It launches on July 1st. I don't know when this is going out. Maybe it'll be a big hit. People will love it. Maybe it'll be a disaster, and I'll never launch a book with an OGN again. it's not something new. I think Next Man technically launched with an OGN. I think that's a pretty cool way to get people invested in a story early on. It's like, oh, here's a massive chunk of story. Like I dare you not to want to find out more about these people after you've read a full graphic novel's worth of stuff about them. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we got that done. So that's why we held off for quite a bit. But then Chris is also super fast. So he got that done like way quicker than I thought he would. And I didn't want the launch to come too close to the end of The Walking Dead, because I was worried that people would be like, you ended Walking Dead for this book, I'm not going to support this book, so I wanted there to be like a break. So it's like, no, Walking Dead was ending regardless. And, now this book is a new thing that you can try, but, I'm not trying to like force you to, I'm not turning off The Walking Dead to make you buy this thing. So yeah.
Can we talk about the end of Walking Dead real quick? Because it was such a clever...
I say no.
It was such a clever move, man.
Thanks.
We always hear the story, and I don't know if Claremont said it on the air, but just in conversation with him, he described, like, the landscape of comics back then. There was no previews. There were no blurbs for fans to read and find out, 3 months in advance that Jean Grey's going to be dying in issue, 137 or whatever it was, man. The only way to be able to do this is to pull that swerve, man. You pulled it with a great style, and as a fan of wrestling and selling and shit like that, that was a masterful stroke, dude.
Oh, thanks. No, that was great. That was a lot of fun. I mean, and I'm surprised that we pulled it off. I mean, years of interviews where people would be like, so when's The Walking Dead going to end? And I would just go, never. It's just never going to end. It's going to go on forever. And in my head, I'm like, 24 issues, 16 issues, 12 issues, 8 issues, like as the years went on. And I feel bad about that. And I don't enjoy lying, but to preserve a surprise like that, like I feel like it's important. But also like friends of mine, like, well, what are you planning on doing with Walking Dead? I'm going to keep it going forever, like, because I just didn't want it to leak. Like up until a month before that issue came out, I think there was like maybe 6 people that knew Walking Dead was ending. My business partners at Skybound, Eric Stevenson, Charlie Adlard, Corey Walker. I think I told Brian K. Vaughan, because I was like, oh man, this is, because we get together sometimes and chat about things. I'll be like, oh man, I'm ending Walking Dead. That's going to be this month. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm going on a hiatus with Saga at some point. Oh shit, does that align? And we're like, But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it was hard keeping it a secret. But again, like it's all about getting back to that place that excited me the most about comics. It's exactly what you're talking about. Like going into the comic shop and like seeing a cover on the rack in the distance and being like, wait a minute, what's that? What's going to happen in that issue? Like, oh my God, I can't wait. And then getting closer and closer to the rack and like honing in on what the cover is and just being like, Jesus, who is this Omega Red guy? And why does Wolverine have coin storage columns like in his forearm? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen.
X-Men number 4 cover. Insert here.
X-Men number 5.
X-Men number 5. Geek test. Nerd test. You win.
Or was the red cover with the Omega Red tentacles coming into frame?
Yeah, I was just testing you, man. Making sure you were still one of us, man. Out there in Glitter Town. You know what, Robert? Was there some extra piece to making that happen? Like, did you have to solicit and did stores have to order fake issues?
Yeah, which is... a questionable decision. Yeah, there is I had covers drawn for 194, 195, and 196. They're the lost covers. I bought the original art off of Charlie so that I could have them because it's kind of cool. Covers that'll never be printed. I like gave him story idea. It's the stupidest thing too, because if you read 193, you can kind of see from those fake covers, like, oh, the story was going to go in this direction. It never was. I could have put literally anything on those covers. No one would have known. But for whatever reason, I thought, like, I'll just, pretend that maybe adult Carl died. And here's Sophia and his daughter at Carl's grave. And here's a shot of Carl with a sword stabbed through his stomach. Like, that'll be fun. Covers have less meaning, though, because you don't, like, when you see the covers when they're solicited, you don't know who those characters are. So yeah, I mean, we had to do that, which was great in that it kept the surprise. Like no one knew that issue was the last issue. No one even knew that issue was going to be massive because it was $3.99 just like every other issue. But then it arrives in stores and it's square bound and is like the length of 3 or 4 issues. So we kept that secret as well. The downside to that, though, is that the largest retailers are DCBS and Midtown Comics, and they do a ton of business through mail order. So your most valuable retail partners who order the most books had taken a ton of orders for issues that no longer exist, and they had to cancel those orders and refund those customers. So that part was possibly a miscalculation on my part. The surprise of it all, I guess, was worth it in the end. But I did have some retailers that were somewhat angry with me when it happened.
Did a lot of people accuse you of ripping off Ultra versus Strangers from 1993?
You'll find that issue of Wizard on one of our earlier episodes. Did they do that?
They did, although I'm not sure if it was actually Strangers. I can't remember if that was the title, but they did that where they ended a book but had solicited a couple of issues so that people didn't realize that was happening.
And it was a shit ass book.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Like so
no one cared.
Yeah. And
are you sure they didn't just cancel the book and say they did that?
That's probably more
these
likely.
These were not issues that were ever going to happen, we swear.
It was a very creative press release writer on their team.
And I do want to make note that we did just break kayfabe here and got a little really cool inside scoop on that whole process, man. I didn't read about that in any Kirkman interviews before. And I saw the look on your face that you were like, oh man, I'm with these dudes and they know the questions to ask.
That's why I wanted to do this interview.
There's a lot to kind of cover, Robert, and I hate to skip like the early days whenever you're coming up as a writer and, I don't know, paying things out with credit card. I feel like you've talked about that in some other interviews. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, and I'm interested in when you become an image partner. And I have a million questions about all of that.
Robert was $40,000 in debt and would shake nervously on the floor, worried that he was going to be in debtor's prison. And I've told all these stories.
They can listen to that on Mark Maron.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about how that comes up, because I mean, nobody else has done that. I didn't even know that was a possibility.
So you got to understand, 14-year-old Robert Kirkman has like Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee. My walls are covered in these guys like posters and stuff. And I had a pull box at a local comic book store, and what I had on my pull box was, and I quote, every Image comic. And so, I would pick up the odd, like, Art Taber's drawing a cool X-Men issue or, something like that. But for the most part, I was like all in with Image Comics. And, I remember as a teenager having, because like you read Wizard magazine back then, and it's like, oh, we got together at Mark Silvestri's house for this, partner meeting, and we were discussing this, and Image X month was planned at this meeting, and these guys, and blah blah blah. And so like you get this like, it's almost like the imaginary stories about the Marvel bullpen, which never actually existed. It was just Stan Lee going, I think the kids will like it if they think we're all in a room together working, But like the Image partners, like they did get together and get burritos together and stuff. And so you grow up reading those stories. I used to have dreams that I remember of like being at an Image partner meeting when I was a teenager, which is just the stupidest thing. So like when I started doing my self-publishing, like I pitched Battle Pope to Image Comics, and I got a very polite no from Jim Valentino, and then decided to be a self-publisher because of that. And so I'd always loved Image Comics, and when I started, I feel like I was the perfect creator to do books at Image Comics because I self-published for 3 years before I ever did a book at Image Comics. So I had talked to printers, I had designed ads, I had dealt with Diamond directly. I put together solicitations for previews. I had gone to conventions and run my own table and, carried my books from a truck through the, back of the convention hall. I've set up tables. I've done literally everything that you could do. I lettered most of my early books. I designed, did I already say I designed ads? I designed ads, and then I designed ads, and I designed ads, and they were all ugly. But when I came to Image, it was like, like, holy shit, you did all this stuff for me? Like, this is amazing. A lot of people come to Image from Marvel or DC, and they're like, wait a minute, I have to do more than turn in a script? Like, what the fuck is this? Less ideal, harder transition. But going from like zooming in on your cover files and making sure your like logo is cropped just so behind Battle Poop's hat, like that was the stuff that I was doing. And so being able to go to a publisher where Image is great because you can have as little or as much control over all that stuff as you want. So you can have their graphic design team design everything for you, but then you get to have someone who's more talented than you send their work to you, and you get to be like, well, move this here, put this over here, change this font, do this. I want the cover to be like this, blah, 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 blah. And you have, complete hands-on with all that stuff. And so not only was it just the absolute like ideal working relationship for me, but I was on the phone with almost every single person that worked at Image Comics almost daily. So I knew all the designers. I knew the receptionist. Oh, who do you want to talk to now? And I'm talking to Jim Valentino. I'm talking to Eric. I'm talking to Brent Braun. Brett Evans. I would talk to different people in the sales department about like, I think I want to do this kind of ad and do this. Da, 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 da. And Eric Stevenson was the marketing guy at that point. So he and I would like write press releases together, and we'd come up with different plans and hey, if we, we're launching Walking Dead. I've got the first 3 issues, pretty much done. I can have a 3rd issue done in like next couple weeks. If I get you those files, can we like just photocopy a bunch of copies of that and send it out to retailers? And he was like, yeah, I think that's something we can do. And so like, we, send out the first 3 issues to retailers to promote that book. So they started in the offices calling me the 6th partner, because it had gotten down to the 5. Or no, I was the 5th partner. That's what it was, because it was just Jim and Eric and Todd and Mark. And so the joke around the office was, oh, the 5th partner's on the phone. Oh, the 5th partner's on the phone, because I was just so hands-on and so plugged in. And I started hearing that, and I was like, 5th partner sounds pretty nice. And so, I'd be like, hey, Eric, like, you think they'll ever make anybody else a partner at Image? Like, is that a thing? And he's like, probably never going to happen. But then over the years, I had met Eric Larson and gotten to know him very well when I was doing Battle Pope. And we had gotten to be very good friends. Me doing Super Patriot is what got me in the door at Image. And then I just started pitching a new book to them, like, I don't know, it seems like every week, but I'm sure it was like every month. But I did like 7 or 8 books at Image in the first like year or two, between like, Brit and Capes and Cloudfall and Reaper and all these books that, people maybe don't remember. And Invincible and Walking Dead, the Tech Jacket. And so I got to know Jim Valentino very closely. And then eventually, from going to conventions, I get to know Mark. I do this pilot season event because they've been doing these pilot season things. And I was like, it'd be really cool if I wrote all the pilot season books. And they were like, what? And I talked them into that. And that was mainly, to try and get to know Mark, not to try and like butter them all up to eventually make me a partner, but just because I was a fan of these guys and I just wanted to know each and every one of them. And so I worked with Mark a little bit. And then Todd, okay. I'll reveal this. So it's been a few years. It's fine. So Todd contacted me and wanted me to write Spawn. I guess Brian Haberlin was running his company at the time, and or the publishing side of things, and was like, hey, would you ever be interested in writing some Spawn? And I was like, I don't want to write any Spawn, but I'd love to create a new character with Todd. And so they were like, well, let's run that up the flagpole, see what he thinks. And so eventually he comes back and they're like, yeah, Todd thinks that'd be really cool. He'd love to collaborate with you on something. And so we start working on Haunt. We were supposed to announce it at a San Diego convention, but we had trouble finding an artist. We hadn't finalized the character's look. We couldn't really we couldn't really announce anything because we didn't really have anything to announce. And so I met Todd. I had talked to him a few times on the phone, and I met him like in his hotel room. And my first meeting with Todd was Haberlin meets me, I think, in the lobby, takes me up to his room, and Todd is laying on the his bed in the room, and his feet are covered in dirt because he lives in Phoenix, and he almost exclusively wears flip flops. And there's so many Todd stories I want to tell. But anyway, so I'm looking at this like dirty feeted like weirdo who I'm meeting for the first time. And in my head, I'm just like, I can't believe this is Todd McFarlane. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. But like in that room, we concocted the plan of me confronting him at a panel and saying, hey man, you should do some more stuff. Like everybody likes Spawn, but you should do something new. And he pretends he doesn't know who I am. And it's like, oh yeah, we should do something together, bud. So that was all like a fix. Like that was all a show. So
Super
I got to work with,
kayfabe. Yeah, man.
yeah. So that's another kayfabe exclusive. Because I've never really revealed that. I feel like it's fine. It's been, no one remembers Haunt at this point, right?
We're among friends.
But so I got to know Todd from that, and I think the thing that got me to be partner was I was doing a signing the following Comic-Con with Todd after we had announced Haunt and we had a print, and we were doing a signing together, and we were giving out that print as part of the promotion after we had just announced the book. And I was still at Marvel at the time, and we were talking about that. And he's, oh, what's it like at Marvel now? You know, because you're at a signing with somebody, and the fans want to talk to you, but all you want to do is talk to Todd McFarlane. So you're that dick creator that's like looking at, yeah, you go. So anyway, Todd, blah, 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 blah. Like I try to do that as little as possible, but it was totally one of those moments, which is unfortunate. But so we're chatting. And at one point, I can't remember how it came up, but I said, look, man, Image has a problem with creators coming up through Image, making a name for themselves, and then going off to Marvel and completely abandoning Image and forgetting like that Image was the one that made them popular enough for Marvel to want to work with them. And I said, if anything, I'm the opposite. Like I'm dying to like leave Marvel and just be at Image. Like I don't like working at Marvel. It's a complete like hassle for me. Like I much prefer what I'm doing on Invincible and Walking Dead, and dealing with editors kind of a headache. And I said, if anything, I'm the opposite. Like I'm the guy that's just ready to ditch Marvel and, be full-time at Image. And he kind of looked over at me and smiled. And for whatever reason, I would find out later that I think at that convention, I think they had a meeting like that night or the night after where all the partners got together with Eric Stevenson. And they were talking about how, we're not getting any younger, and maybe it would be a good idea to bring some, new blood into the company so that Image could survive us. Not that much younger than them, but they were like, okay, so who are the creators out there that that we would possibly like want to work with in that capacity that we think could actually bring something to the table? And Eric Stevenson's like, well, Robert's on the phone with me about like marketing and design and all of his books, and he's pitching a new book like every 2 or 3 months. At that point I had slowed down a little bit, and he's got this Walking Dead book that's blowing up, and it hadn't been a TV show yet, but it was still a very popular comic. And then Todd's like, oh, I'm doing Hunt with this guy. He's a cool guy. And then Mark's like, oh, I did pilot season with this guy. And then Eric's like, this guy's been bugging me on the phone since he was doing this dumb Battle Pope book. Like, they all knew me. And so for whatever reason, I was the candidate that came up because I had an individual relationship with, and Jim was like, yeah, he's cool. He pitches some good books. And I've always loved Jim. Jim was great. So yeah, it kind of, then it became like if we were to make you partner, would you leave Marvel? Because I was under contract at Marvel at the time. They were just like, I think Eric Stevenson called me and was like, these guys want to make you partner, but they're not going to make you partner while you're exclusive to Marvel. So, if that's something you wanted to do, you would need to leave Marvel. And I was like, I would love to do that. I do not enjoy working at Marvel. And so then it was a process of me trying to get out of my contract at Marvel, which was, not easy. But I made that happen, and then became a partner at Image, and I haven't looked back.
You did release a
because
video.
Marvel sucks. Sorry, go ahead.
You did release a video, and I'm trying to think of, like, my timeline's not perfect, but I remember you doing a video, and it was about, create new stuff and create your own stuff, and you're done with Marvel, and everybody make their own books and make new books.
Yeah.
You've mentioned like promo and marketing a few times. We've talked to other people. Mark Miller comes to mind. Guys who, Brian K. Vaughan comes to mind. Guys who seem to have an eye towards this stuff of not just making good work, but selling that work. And you strike me as having that similar mentality. Is that something that you're conscious of, or just part of, as you say, self-publishing, you sort of have to do that all yourself? But it is something that I see some cartoonists have that and some don't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm, great at it, but yeah, it was a necessity in the Battle Pope days. Like no one else was. I didn't have a marketing director. I didn't have, any kind of publicity person. It was me contacting websites going, hey, you want to interview me? You want to talk to me about this? You want to talk to me about that? No. Okay, cool. Yeah. Hey, I'm out of here. No problem. But you're going to get that hustle. You develop that hustle. And, once it's there, it doesn't really go away. And if you look at, launching Firepower with a graphic novel and then a first issue that's supposed to be on Free Comic Book Day, launching Die with a, stealth launch that nobody knew about, launching Oblivion Song with a statue that was sold as a silver foil comic that comes with a statue. Like I'm always trying to do something to like make my work stand out, and something that's like a little bit different. And half of that is not only to try and help that book, but I feel like there's an obligation, especially at Image, to try. Anyone who can try different things should try different things to see if it works. The greatest example of that, I think, is Saga #1. Brian K. Vaughan was talking to me before that book ever launched, and he was like, I think my first issue is going to be 44 pages. And I was like, I think you might be a moron. And he was like, I don't know, man. Like, I just feel like it's like, it's super tough to like get people to try something new. And if you give them a big, thick first issue for cover price, like, you don't jack up the price or anything. Like, it's an easy entry. It's not like an overpriced comic. But like they get this, like, this new world and they get to know these characters. And I was like, yeah, but you're doing like 2 issues worth of work and you're only getting paid for 1 issue. Like it's a huge strain on like the budget of the comic, and, your artists having to do all this work before the thing comes out. And I don't know, man, just do 2 issues. Like, well, what's the problem? I don't know, man. I'm going to try this. I was like, all right, good luck. Try that. Let's see how that works. And then ever since then, every first issue I've ever done has been a minimum of 44 pages. Outcast was like 48 pages. And so Image is a great community where, my capacity with Eric Stevenson, talking to creators and stuff, I've often said, like, what's great about Image is that Eric and I will say, mostly Eric, I don't really talk to all the creators, but Eric will say, like, that's a bad idea. Maybe you shouldn't do that. And it's his job to take his wisdom and what he knows about how comics works to tell you that. But the beauty of Image is that ultimately at the end of the day, you can go, I really feel strongly we should do this. And it's a discussion. It's not, well, nope, this is the way it goes. And 9 times out of 10, Eric will be like, hey, look, man, if you want to try it, let's see how it goes. And if it works, other creators can use it and try to see if it works for them as well. And I think that over the years, there's, $9.99 trades or that. Like that was something that some companies had done, but no one had done it on the scale that we did at Image. An entire line where the first volume of all these series is under $10. That was a big deal that I think helped Image for a good long time. There's all these little tricks, that we've come up with over the years that we try to, use over and over again when they work.
As a partner, what are your responsibilities? Like, what does that do, both good and bad, advantages, and how does that affect your business? But also, what are your responsibilities to Image?
It's kind of a, it's kind of a whatever you want. I mean, Jim Valentino is all the partners are very involved to a certain extent, but, we all do different things. Todd talks a lot of strategy. Eric Larson is like the comics purist that's like, how do we get to print on newsprint? Like there's like fun ideas and cool stuff that come from him. we all to a certain extent work on like creator relations. So if a creator wants to do a book at Image, but they know me better than they know Eric Stevenson, well, then I'll come to that dinner at a convention and I'll make introductions and, try to smooth over, the relationship as quickly as I can, so that everybody feels like they're, part of the Image family. I also I don't do it as much anymore because I'm old and busy, but I would do a ton of outreach. Like I'd be like, this creator is fucking awesome. I'm gonna get to know him, and I'm gonna try and talk him into doing books at Image. So like, I don't think Brian Lee O'Malley likes me because when I first moved out to LA, I'd be like, hey, we're both comic creators. Let's get dinner. And then I would basically sit at dinner for like an hour. That's like, yeah, and look, man, Scott Pilgrim's cool, but you should do something new. You should do it at Image. And eventually, I think he was like, do you ever have like a casual conversation? Because like I've had dinner with you twice, and I think the only thing you're ever talking about is trying to get me to do more comics, draw more comics, and have them come out more often, and do those comics at Image. You seem kind of like a dick, but eventually we got Snot Girl. And I'm sure that would have happened anyway. I'm not trying to take credit for that, but I do that kind of stuff. Like, Ed Brubaker, man, you got to stop doing your books at Icon. Marvel sucks. Like, come over and do these books at Image. You'll be much happier. And then a couple years later, Ed's like, I'm much happier. So, and that feels good. I do it not only, I was doing it before I was an Image partner. So, that's part of the reason why they made me a partner, I think. But I do it because I love Image and I know it's the best deal in town. But I also know that, like, if you do it right, it's this like stress-free environment where you can just create and you have free reign to do whatever you want. And it's just a greater life, for a comic book creator.
Can you talk about anything that's going on at Image right now that you guys are sort of addressing in terms of COVID, the direct market, changes that you see coming up as, hopefully comic stores come back to life?
Yeah. I mean, we're doing a lot of, where Eric, I'm aware of it, but Eric is the one, Eric Stevenson is, the publisher. He's taking charge. He's doing things. He's filling me in. I mean, we're restructuring the line, trying to put out fewer comics to begin with, as we ramp back up. I mean, as I'm talking, it's early June. I don't know when this is going to go live. And we're also behind the scenes trying to put together some very high-end marquee books as quickly as we can to try and like drive more interest into stores. There's going to be something happening in early July that I can't really talk about. That is something that's designed to, kind of get people's notice and tell people like, hey, it's time to come back into a comic shop and here's something cool for you. Just to try and make going into a comic book store something special because there is a concern that after 2 or 3 months of not going into a comic shop, there is going to be a barrier to returning where it's like, oh, well, I've now gotten used to life where I'm not getting comics every week. And, maybe that's not as high a priority for me as it once was. I know that's a concern. My experience is, oh my God, when do I get to go to a comic shop again? So I hope it's not too valid of a concern, but we're trying to do that kind of stuff.
Any looks at alternative distributors, maybe for Image's book, their book division, perhaps?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're always looking at that kind of stuff. Right now, I know early on it was looking like, everybody was talking about how Diamond wasn't paying and, Diamond was, looking kind of shaky, I guess I could say, because of all those stories that were going around. But, you really have to give Diamond credit just because they have been keeping this industry alive for as long as they have. And, I think the one distributor monopoly is probably not the best thing in the world. And so I'm hopeful that, maybe what DC is doing will grow into some kind of competition because I think that is a good thing. But I'm hesitant to vilify Diamond as much as most retailers and comic book, creators do, just because, the non-returnable direct market is a construct that benefits publishers a great deal and has made comic books, viable moving forward. So I'm not like, rushing to try and like tear Diamond down and build up a new system, as much as I do strongly feel like competition is a good thing. So I guess that is a somewhat diplomatic answer to your question, but there's all kinds of things that are being discussed, but you know, any um, any future in comics without Diamond is a scary future.
Let's talk Skybound before we get there.
Okay.
Where does that come from,
I saw
Kirkman?
that. I can't wait for this note. I can't wait for this to come into play. I don't know what it's going to be.
No gotcha stuff. Just a TV show about comics. But Skybound, where does the imprint come from? What's the genesis of that? Where do your interests lie? How does it work? What's the difference between a Skybound project and a regular Image book?
Yeah, so a Skybound project, I'll get to that. Skybound came from Walking Dead Happens. It happens as a TV show. Because of my amazing management and legal team, Walking Dead happens in a way where I have licensed The Walking Dead television to AMC, but I still very much own The Walking Dead and control vast aspects of The Walking Dead as an entertainment unit. So like, I still had the right to do video games, merchandise, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so they were making this television show, and I was like, this television show could come out and be a hit. It could be a failure, but now is the time to be doing some action figures and some T-shirts. And George Lucas is always something that comes to mind, and I'm just like, well, geez, I kind of have the George Lucas deal where he, did the Star Wars movie, but had control of Star Wars merchandise and action figures and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, I'd be a fool not to be doing this stuff just in case Walking Dead does end up being a big hit. And so my manager at the time was David Alpert, and I was talking to him, and I was like, I have the ability to do all this stuff. I don't have the time. I'm writing the comic. I'll be working on the show. I can't be putting all this stuff together. And so I was like, we should form a company. And that became Skybound. And Skybound was initially just existed to manage the Walking Dead empire, for lack of a better term. So like, we would license out T-shirts, and then we would figure out how to make T-shirts on our own, and we would start making things in-house. We would license out video games, figure out how to make video games on our own, and then start making things in-house. And so we started building these big pipelines where we would figure out how to make Walking Dead things, because Walking Dead blew up as a TV show and was super popular. And then we sit back and we're like, well, hold on, if we can do this Walking Dead thing and this Walking Dead thing and this Walking Dead thing, and we're all doing this in-house, and we've kind of built this cool company, like, we very quickly were like, we should try to do this with other things. And the idea is, if it took 7 or 8 years to get Walking Dead from being a comic to being this big TV show, like, what can we do with the resources that we have now to try and shorten that time to make more comics viable media entities, to sound like a cold, emotionless robot. But yeah, and it was just being able to do Saga action figures or some of the other things that we've done for fun. Now we do board games and all kinds of ridiculous things. It's turned out to be a pretty huge company. We do film and television on our own now. We're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Very proud of everything we've been able to accomplish with Skybound. As far as like what the difference between a Skybound comic and an Image comic is, I wanted the Skybound deal to be something that I would have done in the Battle Pope days. So like, the Image deal is, you've got all this freedom. A lot of people kind of paint Image as like, well, you're basically self-publishing. Not true. Absolutely 100% not true. They have a great marketing team. They have a great graphic design team. There's a sales department. It's got everything that a publisher would want. There's no editorial staff, and they pay on like a advanced structure as opposed to like page rates. So there's those differences. So I try to structure Skybound as like, if you want to do a straight Image book, like, by all means go do a straight Image book. But if you need the kind of thing that you would get from an IDW or an Oni, instead of doing that, we offer this at Skybound and we can do this. So we're trying to find creators that, want to have a lot of the freedom that you have at Image, with a little bit of the structure, like editorial interference, things that I don't want now. But for some reason, there are creators out there that really want to have somebody reading their scripts and giving them notes. I don't get it, but Skybound will offer that service for you. And we have the best editors that I have, drilled into them. Like, these writers don't work for you. They're your partner. So help them out, give them the notes they want. But if they feel strongly they don't want to do your note, they're not going to do your note, and that's fine. So, we have a little bit of a different mentality when it comes to that kind of stuff. And, Ariel Basich, Sean Makowitz, John Moisen, it's a great editorial team.
The TV show that we were going to bring up is the Secret History of Comics. That seems like a really cool project. I don't know if you want to give a brief description of what that was. How did that come about? Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a series of 6 episodes that basically were to try and delve into. It's the stories that the idea basically was the stories that we all talk about at conventions are not necessarily widely known by the public at large. And so, there's a tremendous opportunity to tell some of these stories, especially at a time when there is so many, big movies and TV shows based on these comic book properties. Like, the stories behind the creation of these comics is as interesting, if not more interesting, than the stories themselves. To borrow a soundbite from our promotion of that goddamn show. I did get a lot of criticism from the comics community where it was like, we all know these stories. This isn't a secret. Like, this is, come on, man, find something deeper. And I was like, well, it's for a different audience, guys. I will say that we had a great team working on that. We had a great research team, different writers and directors. AMC wanted to put my name. The show was not supposed to be called Robert Kirkman's Secret History of Comics. It was just supposed to be Secret History of Comics. And then they came to me one day and they were like, okay, so we're doing James Cameron's history of sci-fi, and we're doing Eli Roth's history of horror, and we want to make this show Robert Kirkman's Secret History of Comics so that they're all part of one group. And I was like, if you want to put me on equal footing with James Cameron and Eli Roth, I don't know how I can say no to that, even though I detest putting my name in front of stuff like that. I have been against it many times, just because I feel like it's, I don't know, a little too, I'm from the South. Go back to that joke. I feel like it's a little too self-promoting. But yeah, that was a last minute addition. But what I'm trying to get at is I would watch some of those cuts come in and I'd be like, where the fuck did we find this radio interview where Jack Kirby is calling in while Stanley's doing an interview and they're like arguing? Like, I have never heard this. So in the process of making that show, there were things that I learned where I was like, I had no idea this was happening. This is great. So it was a really fun process making that show, and I'm really happy we were able to do it. I was very hands-on with the Image Comics episode just because that was, a story I was much more familiar with. I mean, I had heard the Wonder Woman stories, and I definitely knew all about Milestone, and those were some great episodes. But that was stuff where I would learn things. But Image Comics, I was like, no, don't say that. That's a thing. Like, well, that's out of order. You need to get this over here, and that, I changed that dialogue and blah blah blah. So. That episode I was much more hands-on with.
I was excited that you did the Milestone episode. That's an imprint that I was a fan of as a kid, and it's nice to see it get a little bit more mainstream coverage. I think it's a pretty interesting chapter in comics history, and especially 90s comics history, which is one of my favorite decades for comics history. So I thought that was a standout. Did you plan on more seasons? I was kind of just curious what other topics were in your list or how you whittled down to the 6 that you did in that season.
I wanted to do an episode that was just about Jack Kirby, and I wanted to do an episode that was just about Steve Ditko. We were going to do the Jack Kirby one, and then I don't know if this is out of school or anything, but they came to us and they were like, if we make it more about Stan Lee, we can get Stan Lee in the episode. And I was like, oh boy, all right, I guess it's happening again. Stan Lee is coming in and shoehorning himself in. I don't know what I don't want to get into all that. Everybody knows the history there. I'm not going to, they both added, big contributions, but you cannot deny that Jack Kirby does not get as much credit as he deserves, and definitely gets less credit than Stan Lee currently does. So I wanted to do that. So if we had continued, I would have done another episode that was just about like Jack Kirby's life and his contributions, and his what he did at Marvel before Stan Lee, what he did with Stan Lee, what he did at DC without Stan Lee, what he then did at Marvel without Stan Lee. I think it's important to recognize just how much of his contributions did not involve Stan Lee.
70s Kirby DC would make an amazing documentary. Like, it would just be so beautiful. Like, the art and everything from that era would be great to see on screen.
Yeah. And then Steve Ditko. I think an episode all about like Dark Horse would be really cool, just because that's a company that has a tremendous history, has done a lot of insane comics that have been cornerstones. Something like the Image episode, but like more about like Hellboy and Sin City and Dark Horse Presents and Ghost and Comics Greatest World. And
you can leave Ghost out.
Yeah, I don't know if that one needs to be in there. Erase that and put like Aliens and Predators and all their license tie-ins, because that was a pretty smart move that they did.
Boris the Bear, Rob Liefeld cameo pin-up in there.
The Mask.
Was that a Dark Horse book? Huh.
Boris the Bear, yeah.
Amongst others.
It went elsewhere. Can we talk about, real quick, that Jack Kirby radio show interview piece, man, where Stan Lee calls in? Did you ever hear this?
Yes. Stan Lee calls in.
Stan Lee calls in.
It's like Kirby's birthday,
No, it was a
right?
Stan Lee interview that Jack Kirby called in, wasn't it?
No.
Am I backwards?
No, because it was kind of a bummer, because the guys doing the radio show, first off, it was a WBAI radio show. This is New York. This is a network called Pacifica. There's like 7 of these stations around the country, all user funded. So it's not like NPR where there's underwriting by corporations. Yeah. It's like community funded radio. It's where George Carlin did the 7 filthy words or whatever, storied radio station. And they have a comic show, and they had Kirby in there for his birthday, and it was this nice thing, but it's senior Kirby, so like there are parts where they're like, Kirby, can you just tell us about the origin of the demon? And he doesn't even remember that he created a character called the Demon. He's like, oh, demons have been around for 10,000 years, like that kind of thing. So it's this like really nice, beautiful thing, and these fanboys think they're doing Kirby like a favor, like it's going to be reuniting frickin' Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin. And we have a special guest on the phone, Stan Lee. And he just kind of like railed on Stan Lee a little bit. Like he's so respectful, but you could tell that there's some, I did everything, like that kind of stuff. Stan Lee. And what I like most about that conversation is that Jack Kirby would never call him Stan or Stan Lee. It was always Stan Lee.
Yeah, Stan Lee.
How you doing, Stan Lee?
That's a great clip of audio for sure. It's so rare with these older creators.
You have to remember that Jack and Stan's relationship started when Stan Lee was an intern at Marvel.
Yeah.
So it's like Jack was like, oh yeah, this fucking kid walking around, and then the next thing you know, he's like working with the guy. So it's nice to hear that come through in the interview, where it's like, yeah, no, this is Stanley Lieber, this fucking kid that used to like sharpen my pencils back in the office.
He would tell those stories, Jack Kirby, like in that Gary Groth interview in Comics Journal. It's always very emasculating too, because tears are always involved. Certainly when Marvel's about to go out of business, tears are always involved, and he always mentions that Stan Lee was 12 years old, like playing an ocarina, like dancing on furniture and shit, when they were like trying to pitch Captain America.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going.
Brilliant marketer. No Marvel Comics without Stan Lee.
Yeah.
But he gets too much credit.
Yeah, there's so much complications around that. It's a impossible topic to approach in terms of defending one or the other.
As a comics fan, you know both of their bodies of work, and there's magic there. The tandem, it's what did Mark Miller say? 1 + 1 is 3. Like that's the 1 + 1 is 3 thing. I love the Jack Kirby Fourth World, but those are special comics.
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. I like that. I like that History of Comics show, is why I wanted to bring it up, Robert. For anybody that hasn't watched that, I'm sure that's available to stream somewhere. You can track it down. But I love these kind of documentaries on comics histories. The one that I was thinking of for a second season would be like Comics Code. You know, like that whole 50s scare of comics would have been
Oh yeah, we had
a
that.
fun
We had that
topic.
planned as an episode. We had 12 episodes planned at one point, and I can't remember what the episodes were, but the Comics Code was definitely one of them.
I don't know if this is like against the rules or anything, man. But
Ooh, 80s black and white explosion would be a good one. You know, like that's a pretty fun era. Like
Yeah, I
1986
think
could be its own episode.
the black and white explosion was definitely one too because of the Ninja Turtles. I mean, you had to kind of like base an episode off of some kind of bit of pop culture that you could anchor it to.
Sure.
So like we were like, oh, turtles are in there. Yeah, we'll totally do that.
I had a friend who they had a Nielsen box, man, and I implored them. You got to keep this. You got to keep this channel on. You got to keep this show on when this shit comes on. Like you got to be watching that for me. I will give you money because I just want more of that, man. There's this great series in Japan on NHK. Their sort of main public station. It's called Manben, and it's a cartoonist that hosts it, Naoki Urasawa. He just visits mangaka studios, and they set up cameras everywhere, film the cartoonist working for between like 2-3 days and a week, and take the footage down, make a package, and then Urasawa sits with them and they talk about it like it's last week's football game or some shit. It's so freaking cool, and that was the closest we've got in America on like the mainstream level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you might. I don't think anything exists like that on like a YouTube level. Pie in the sky dream, like we make enough, like we put enough shit together, like we could manufacture some shit like that. But it was great, and to speak to your point about the different audience for that show, my folks loved it. You know, it was really a way to like have some common ground, because my pops will be like, you want me to save the Sunday paper for you, boy? I'm just like, nah, it's okay, man. Robert, what's on the horizon?
And my big thing right now is the launch of Firepower with Chris Somney. So like it's funny, the OGN will be out on Wednesday, July 1st. We had printed the Free Comic Book Day version of issue 1, and there's currently not a date for Free Comic Book Day, and so Diamond is allowing us to ship that issue to stores for free on that Wednesday. So on that day, you'll be able to go in and get the OGN for $9.99. It's 154 pages of story, and you'll be able to get the first issue, which continues after the OGN, and starts the series for free that same day. So it'll be kind of like what we intended with the Free Comic Book Day launch, but not exactly. So I'm excited to see how that goes. That's the main thing. I've got Outcast is going to be wrapping up with issue 48, which because of the coronavirus and everything will now be. I think the final issue finally comes out in October, so that'll be cool. And we got Die 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 and Oblivion song going, doing a lot of that stuff. The old Walking Dead show will be coming back in. We'll be airing. I know dates. I don't think they're public.
Yeah. Don't worry about that.
But we have the finale of episode. This is kind of Kayfabe. Nobody gives a fuck about the show. It's all good. There will be more Walking Dead television for you to watch at some point in the future, and I got a bunch of other stuff. Still working on the Invincible cartoon series. Can't reveal any dates or anything. I get people on Twitter that are like, "Is it still coming out? Is it still coming out?" Yeah, it's still coming out. It takes a while to work on a cartoon.
Yeah,
unfortunately, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, tell those fuckers that it took the Tick like 3 years before it was announced and that shit came out. There were commercials for it for years before it came out. Continue.
But the world works in a way that, like, when you hire actors, the news leaks. So when we hired the voice actors for Invincible, it started leaking that, like, J.K. Simmons and Sandra Oh and Stephen Yeun are going to be doing this cartoon series, and so we had to announce the cast. Otherwise, it would have been leaked, and who knows how they're going to report that kind of stuff. So we had to announce when we started doing voice recording. But you start doing voice recording like before you start doing animation, so that's why there's a big gap between, like, we're doing the Invincible show and here's this amazing cast, and don't worry, it'll be out at some point in the future. But we should be announcing the release date and showing some footage from that show very soon. And I'm very excited about that extremely violent cartoon that we're making.
Where are people going to see that? Is that Amazon?
No, it's on Amazon Prime.
Right.
Where should people follow you, Robert, on social media?
get off social media, guys. Don't follow me. Just don't. All I do is talk about Tom Cruise and Transformers. Like, it's not, no one wants that. No, I'm on, follow me if you want. I'm on Twitter. It's a hard one to remember. It's at Robert Kirkman. I have an Instagram that I've never posted on. But at some point I want to start that up, just because I feel like that's a good platform. I can like show pictures of stuff and do things. But there's only so much time in the day. I've never been on Facebook before.
Congratulations.
I mean, people say like a badge of honor now. I mean, fuck Mark Zuckerberg and all that. But I didn't get on Facebook for the stupidest reason, because like my MySpace was collapsing and Facebook had been around for a while. And I thought to myself, I'll just wait for the next one. I don't want to try and get on Facebook. It's been around for a while. I'll just get, it's going to collapse just like MySpace. I'll get on the next one. And apparently there is no next one. I don't know. But now it's mainly just used for old people complaining about people not being racist enough, right? I don't know. So yeah. So not on Facebook, I guess. Boy, this is going poorly. I feel like the interview went well until this point.
Hey man, the cartoonists notoriously are shy pluggers. Robert, thanks a lot, man.
Hey man, it's great talking to you guys.